Have you ever caught yourself replaying a single moment in your mind long after everyone else has already moved on? That quiet spiral where a small comment becomes a full investigation, where a simple choice turns into an entire mental courtroom. And while you're sitting there, staring at the ceiling or scrolling through your phone, you wonder, why do I do this? Why can't I just let things be? Maybe you know the feeling of analyzing a text message like it's a secret code, or replaying a conversation again and again, trying to figure out what someone meant. Maybe your mind builds entire scenarios out of thin air, stacking possibilities like dominoes and waiting for the one that might fall wrong. It's almost like there is a tiny detective living inside your head, constantly pulling files, digging up evidence, refusing to close a case even when there's nothing left to solve. And you've probably told yourself it's not a big deal, that you're just being careful or thoughtful or responsible. Yet somewhere inside, you also know the truth. Sometimes your mind doesn't feel like a helpful ally. Sometimes it feels like a runaway engine that won't slow down, even when you desperately want it to. But here's the secret you rarely admit, even to yourself. You overanalyze because you truly care. You care about how you show up, how others see you, how safe you feel, how much control you have. And caring isn't wrong, it never was. But what if this habit, this constant mental looping, isn't simply who you are? What if it's something that grew from somewhere, something that once protected you? As you sit with that thought, ask yourself, what am I searching for when I overthink? And what part of me is asking to be understood? It's strange, isn't it, how overanalysis can feel like a part of your personality, almost like a roommate living inside your mind, rearranging your thoughts even when you didn't ask for help. You don't wake up one day and decide to dissect everything. It just becomes the way your inner world operates, quietly shaping how you move through life. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear it whispering, not in words, but in tension, in hesitation, in the endless search for certainty. Overanalyzing isn't loud or dramatic. It often slips in so quietly you barely notice it. It lives in the gap between what you feel and what you fear. It lives in the space where you crave safety but rarely feel fully secure. It's the part of you that tries to protect you by predicting every possible outcome. It's your mind building maps, tracing patterns, connecting dots that no one else even sees. Sometimes it feels like a superpower. Other times it feels like a weight you can't set down. Imagine this part of you as a watchful guardian, always scanning the horizon, always preparing for what might go wrong. It doesn't mean you're dramatic or overly emotional. It means your brain learned to survive by paying attention. It learned to read between the lines, to notice microshifts in tone, to spot the slightest signs of danger, real or imagined. And because it helped you once, it kept doing it. Your mind simply didn't know when to stop. And maybe you've blamed yourself for this. Maybe you've told yourself you are too much, too sensitive, too cautious, too worried about things that don't matter. But what if this inner mechanism isn't something broken? What if it's an old instinct trying to protect you in the only way it knows how? Overanalysis shapes your choices, your relationships, your moments of silence. It turns small decisions into long calculations. It makes simple interactions feel like puzzles. It keeps you alert, prepared, cautious. But it also makes you tired, so tired. Yet even in that exhaustion, there's something deeply human about it. Something rooted in a desire for clarity, for understanding, for emotional safety. You don't overthink because you're flawed. You overthink because somewhere inside, a part of you believes that understanding everything will finally help you breathe. And maybe the real question is this: if this part of you could speak, what would it say about all the things it's trying to protect you from? To understand why you overanalyze, you have to go back, not to a dramatic moment, not to one single memory, but to the quiet conditions that shaped you when you were too young to understand what was happening. Overanalysis doesn't appear out of nowhere. It is learned, absorbed, and slowly woven into the way you see yourself in the world. It begins in the small spaces where you once felt uncertain, unprepared, or unseen, long before you had the words to explain any of it. Maybe you grew up in a home where the emotional weather changed without warning. Some days were warm and safe, and other days felt sharp, tense, unpredictable. As a child, you learned to scan for clues long before anyone else noticed the shift. You learned to read faces, tones, footsteps. You learned to become hyper-aware because you needed to know if the room was safe, if the people you depended on were okay, if you should brace yourself or soften your voice or disappear altogether. Or perhaps you were raised in a place where mistakes were not simply mistakes. They were events. They carried consequences that felt larger than they should have. Maybe you learned early on that being careful enough was the only way to avoid criticism, disappointment, or conflict. So your mind became your shield. You replayed conversations before they happened. You imagined outcomes so you could avoid the painful ones. You analyzed your every move because that's what kept you out of trouble. There's also the possibility that you grew up feeling unseen or misunderstood. When no one explains what they feel, why they are upset, or how they truly see you, your mind begins filling in the blanks. You start guessing. You over-explain. You assume. You learn to make sense of things by pulling them apart, examining them, understanding them from every angle. It becomes your way of staying connected, even when clarity is missing. For some, the root begins even earlier. Maybe you were the quiet child, the one who felt everything deeply. Sensitivity is a gift, but when no one helps you manage it, it becomes overwhelming. You notice too much. You sense subtle shifts that others brush aside. You feel responsible for tension that isn't yours. And without guidance, your inner world becomes a place of constant analysis, a place where every feeling becomes something to decode. And then there's the child who learned to be strong too soon. The one who had to be the problem solver, the caretaker, the one who held things together. When you grow up carrying responsibilities that exceed your age, your brain learns to anticipate every possible outcome. You think ahead because you had to. You overthink because it was safer than being unprepared. The world felt heavy, so you learned to study it closely. Maybe your story is one of separation, absence, or inconsistency. Maybe someone left. Maybe someone you relied on wasn't always there. And in that gap, your mind became your constant companion, your inner evaluator, your early warning system. Overanalysis became your way of staying ready for whatever might shift next, because unpredictability once hurt you more than anything else. Each of these experiences teaches something powerful. If I understand everything, I can stay safe. That belief becomes a quiet motto, shaping not only how you think but how you love, how you react, how you navigate your days. It becomes the lens through which you see relationships, opportunities, and even silence. And because this belief was formed when you were young, when you had no control, no explanation, no stable language for your emotions, your mind stepped in and took charge. Over time, this habit stopped being a response and became an identity. People praised you for being thoughtful, careful, responsible, perceptive. They didn't see the fear behind it. They didn't see the child who learned to analyze life because no one helped them understand it. And so the habit stayed with you, following you into adulthood, whispering that staying alert is the only way to stay safe. But when you look back with gentleness, you can see this truth. Overanalysis was not born from flaw. It was born from survival. It was a child's best attempt to create stability in a world that didn't always provide it. And even now, it is still trying, still protecting, still scanning, still hopping to keep you from being hurt again. At some point, the overanalysis that once protected you begins to shape itself into a mask, one you wear so naturally that even you forget it's there. It's the mask of the responsible one, the thoughtful one, the person who always double-checks, anticipates problems, and notices everything. On the outside, it can look calm, put together, even wise. People may admire you for your careful mind, your ability to think ahead, your sensitivity to details they gloss over. They see competence. They see insight. They see someone who never seems surprised by life. But inside, the story feels very different, doesn't it? Beneath that polished surface, your mind is constantly running calculations, rehearsing outcomes, scanning for tiny signs that something might go wrong. It's like carrying a silent engine that never turns off, even in moments when you desperately wish it would. You may smile, nod, or reassure others that everything is fine, but your thoughts keep circling, checking every angle, trying to keep you safe in ways no one else ever sees. This mask isn't fake. It's a survival mechanism your younger self created long before you understood what survival even meant. It helped you navigate unpredictable emotions, unclear expectations, or situations where you felt responsible for keeping peace. It taught you how to stay ahead of disappointment by preparing for it. It taught you how to soften conflict by noticing the earliest signs of tension. It taught you how to avoid mistakes by imagining every possible consequence. And it worked, at least enough to keep you steady when you had no other tools. But every survival mechanism casts a shadow. The same tendencies that once protected you can begin to isolate you. You might find yourself over-explaining, apologizing too quickly, saying yes when you want to say no, or replaying conversations long after they end. You might hesitate to make decisions because you fear choosing wrong. You might struggle to relax, even during moments that are supposed to be peaceful. And that inner engine, the one that's always scanning, keeps running because it doesn't realize that the danger has passed. The contrast between how others see you and how you feel inside can be exhausting. People might tell you that you're calm, thoughtful, composed, or mature. They don't see the tension in your chest, the tightness in your breathing, or the way you replay interactions when you're alone. They don't see the part of you that constantly wonders if you misunderstood something or missed a cue. They see the mask, and the mask is convincing. But that doesn't mean it's the whole truth. This survival mechanism was never meant to be a prison. It was meant to help you handle moments that overwhelmed you. It was meant to keep you prepared, not perpetually anxious. Yet when a strategy is used for too long, it stops feeling like a strategy and starts feeling like a personality. You forget that it was chosen unconsciously, not inherited. You forget that it began as protection, not identity. Still, if you listen closely, you can feel the separation between who you truly are and the mask you wear. You can sense the longing for ease, for presence, for moments where your mind doesn't need to predict every step. And acknowledging that longing doesn't mean rejecting the part of you that learned to overanalyze. It simply means recognizing that the world you live in now may not require the same defenses you once needed. Your mask was built from strength, not weakness, but you don't have to live behind it forever. By the time you reach adulthood, overanalysis no longer feels like something you do. It feels like something that happens inside you automatically, like breathing or blinking. It shows up in small, ordinary moments, moments no one else would think twice about. A short text message, a change in someone's tone, a delay in a reply, a subtle shift in someone's expression. And suddenly your mind is off again, turning a tiny spark into a whole constellation of possibilities. You tell yourself you're just being careful, but deep down you feel the weight of that familiar pressure, the need to understand everything before anything goes wrong. You might find yourself replaying conversations long after they end, wondering if you said something off, wondering if someone misread your intentions, wondering why you can't just be confident in what happened. You may scroll through social media and overthink a comment you made, or a photo you posted, or the silence that follows when no one reacts the way you hoped. Simple interactions can turn into emotional puzzles, each piece needing to fit perfectly before you can feel at ease. And then there are the emotional triggers. Moments of uncertainty, moments where someone seems distant, moments where plans change, moments where you feel left out, moments where your efforts go unnoticed. Each one pulls on an old thread and your mind rushes to fill the empty space with explanations, stories, predictions. Do you ever notice how quickly your thoughts move when you feel unsure? How your chest tightens? How your stomach sinks? How you begin questioning not just the moment but yourself? Overanalysis also shows up in decisions, big ones and small ones. Choosing a job, responding to a message, trying something new, even picking what to eat. You may find yourself weighing every angle, imagining every outcome, trying to make the perfect choice so you don't regret it later. And while people may admire your thoughtfulness, they don't see the silent tug-of-war happening inside, the fear of mistakes, the fear of disappointing someone, the fear of choosing wrong. In relationships, this habit can create a subtle tension. You might look for hidden meanings in your partner's words, or worry you're not enough, or assume something is wrong when things feel too quiet. You might apologize too quickly, try too hard, or hold back your needs because you don't want to cause conflict. And afterward, when you're alone, your mind starts spinning again, asking questions you can't answer. Did I say the right thing? Did I sound needy? Should I have done something differently? There's an emotional cost to all of this, even if you rarely talk about it. The constant scanning, questioning, checking, predicting, it leaves you mentally exhausted in ways that others don't always understand. You may feel restless even in peaceful moments. You may struggle to enjoy good things because a part of you is waiting for something to shift. You may feel like you're too much inside while trying to appear calm on the outside. But pause for a moment and ask yourself, what am I really afraid will happen if I stop analyzing? What part of me feels safer when I prepare for every possible outcome? And what would it feel like, just for a moment, to let things simply be what they are? These questions aren't meant to fix you. They're meant to bring you closer to yourself. Because beneath the habit, beneath the worry, beneath the constant mental movement, there is a quiet truth waiting for you. You are not analyzing because you are broken. You are analyzing because once, a long time ago, it felt like the only way to stay emotionally safe in a world that didn't always feel safe to you. Healing from overanalysis doesn't mean forcing your mind to be quiet or pretending your thoughts aren't racing. It doesn't mean becoming someone who never worries or someone who never looks beneath the surface. Healing is gentler than that. It begins with noticing, not judging, the patterns that once kept you safe. It begins with understanding that your mind learned to protect you before you had any real choice in the matter. And now, as an adult, you get to choose differently, not by erasing who you are, but by offering yourself the safety you once lacked. Imagine for a moment that the part of you who overanalyzes is not a problem to fix, but a younger version of you who still believes danger is everywhere. When your thoughts start spinning, you can pause not to silence them, but to reassure them. You can say gently, I hear you. I know you're trying to keep me safe. It sounds simple, but this small shift begins teaching your nervous system that the world has changed, that you are no longer powerless, that fear doesn't need to run the show anymore. Healing also means learning to recognize when your mind is creating stories instead of reflecting reality. You don't have to fight the stories or argue with them. Just ask yourself, is this something I know or something I'm imagining because I feel uncertain? That question alone can create space, a moment of breathing room where your thoughts no longer feel like absolute truth. Over time, that space becomes grounding. It becomes a place where you can step back from your spirals and see them for what they are, old reflexes, not predictions. Another part of healing is giving yourself permission to make imperfect choices. When you allow yourself to choose without needing every answer in advance, you teach your mind that mistakes aren't threats, that discomfort doesn't equal danger, that uncertainty isn't a warning sign. Start small. Pick something without overthinking. Respond without rehearsing. Share a thought without polishing it. Let yourself be human, messy, honest, real. Each moment of imperfection rewrites an old belief that you must be perfect to be safe. It also helps to reconnect with your body because overanalysis traps you in your head. When your mind spirals, try returning to simple sensations. The feeling of your feet on the floor, the rise of your breath, the warmth of your hands, the sound of something steady around you. You're not escaping your thoughts. You're reminding your nervous system that you're here, not in the imagined future your mind is trying to predict. And maybe most importantly, healing requires compassion, the kind you rarely give yourself. You've carried this habit for so long, often silently, often with no one to guide you. You survived by being alert, by thinking ahead, by trying to understand what others wouldn't explain. That deserves softness, not shame. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're simply meeting parts of yourself that never had a chance to rest. Little by little, as you practice these small acts of grounding, reassurance, and permission, something begins to shift. Your thoughts become less frantic. Your decisions feel lighter, your relationships more genuine, and you start to trust yourself, not because you've analyzed every outcome, but because you've learned to hold your inner world with more steadiness than fear. Healing doesn't mean shutting down your mind. It means teaching it that the world is no longer the place it once needed to fear. And as you do that, you discover something quiet and powerful: the ability to live, not from hypervigilance, but from presence. As you reach this moment, take a slow breath, not because it fixes anything, but because it reminds you that you are here, alive and growing in ways you rarely give yourself credit for. You've walked through memories, patterns, and quiet truths that most people never explore within themselves. And the fact that you're even listening to these words means you're already healing. You're already shifting. You're already becoming someone who sees themselves with clearer, kinder eyes. You are not defined by your overanalysis. It is something you learned, not something you are. It is a chapter, not your entire story. And even though it has shaped your steps for years, it doesn't own your future. You get to choose what comes next. You get to decide how you want to show up in the world, not by erasing your sensitivity, but by honoring it, guiding it, giving it a safer place to rest. You've spent so long trying to make sense of everything outside of you that you sometimes forget the strength living within you. You forget that you survived things you didn't have language for. You forget how deeply you feel, how carefully you listen, how beautifully you try. But every moment of awareness you've gained makes you more whole, not less. Every insight brings you closer to the version of yourself who trusts instead of fears, who responds instead of reacts, who breathes instead of braces. And maybe you don't feel entirely ready yet. That's okay. Growth isn't a single leap. It's a series of quiet, almost invisible shifts. The way you pause before spiraling, the way you soften your thoughts when they turn harsh, the way you allow uncertainty without panicking. These moments matter. They shape you just as deeply as the old wounds once did. Let yourself imagine, just for a second, what life could feel like if your mind didn't need to scan every moment. What if you moved through your day with a little less pressure and a little more trust? What if your relationships felt lighter because you weren't constantly decoding hidden meanings? What if you let yourself exist without always preparing for the worst? You don't need perfect clarity to take the first steps toward that feeling. You just need willingness. You just need presence. Remember this: you are allowed to rest. You are allowed to feel safe. You are allowed to make choices without knowing every outcome. Your worth isn't tied to how much you anticipate or how deeply you analyze. Your value isn't measured by how perfectly you navigate each moment. You deserve ease. You deserve gentleness. You deserve a life that doesn't feel like a puzzle to solve. And as you move forward from here, carry one simple truth with you: nothing inside you is working against you. Even the parts that overwhelm you are trying in their own imperfect way to protect you. When you understand them, you soften. When you soften, you heal. And when you heal, you open space for a version of yourself who doesn't need to overthink to feel safe anymore. You are growing into someone steadier, someone calmer, someone who trusts their own steps. And that transformation isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet and steady, like a sunrise slowly filling a dark room. Let it rise in you. Let it warm you. Let it remind you that you are allowed to move forward without fear guiding every move. You are enough. You always were. And as you continue your journey, let that truth be the place your mind returns to, not out of analysis, but out of peace.